Okay, good afternoon. We're ready to get started. I want to thank you all for coming today. Welcome to the Wilson Center. My name is Leah Shanley, and I work with the Center's Science and Technology Innovation Program. Our program is dedicated to helping government, businesses, and the public anticipate and manage new technologies and their impacts. We have today our director, Dave Rajeski. I don't know if you want to wave your hand. We're less than a week removed from a historic hurricane and perhaps an even rarer East Coast earthquake. So for all of us, the vital role that first responders play in helping us figure out what's happening and what we need to do in such instances is very fresh in our memories. But it's not just the job of the pros. Now, even average citizens, armed with smartphones, have a role to play during man-made and natural disasters. The worldwide response to the Haitian earthquake and the Japanese tsunami provided vivid proof that these technologies and the citizens that use them are playing an increasingly important role in emergency response and recovery. It's difficult to overstate the significance of the sea change we're witnessing. Citizen-powered situational awareness was on display in dramatic ways. Haitians sent SMS and text messages calling for help. Via the internet, volunteers from around the world translated and mapped these requests. That allowed first responders and traditional relief organizations to incorporate citizen-based information into their planning and response operations. But new technologies come with strings attached in the form of new policy and legal questions. Today's session will focus on the liability and reliability of citizen-generated information for disaster management. This will be the first in a series of monthly panels organized in collaboration with the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation and other partners, which will address the public policy challenges that these emerging technologies present. With that, I'd like to turn the program over to our moderator. Please help me in welcoming Vice Chairman of NAPSG, Rand Napoli, who will introduce our panel.
Thank you very much, Leah. It is certainly a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the next 2 hours as we walk through this very, very interesting subject. As Leah notes, we have a very distinguished panel of both representing both government and industry. I'd like to introduce them briefly now, and then you'll get a much more full introduction to them when each of them has an opportunity to speak to you. I'll start out to your right, or to my left and your right. Chief Charles Werner is the fire chief of the Charlottesville Fire Department here in Virginia. To his left is Yo Geekus. Yo is a captain with the Los Angeles City Fire Department. To his left is Jody Kramer. Jody is a general attorney with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. To her left is Deborah Shadden. Deborah is a core team member and infrastructure working group lead for Crisis Commons. Thank you for being with us. To her left is Governor Jim Geringer, former governor of Wyoming and Director of Policy and Public Sector Strategies for ESRI. To his left is Edward Robson, an attorney with Robson & Robson, LLC. Thank you also for being here. And to his left, Martin Valentine, Senior Manager with USAA Insurance. So again, very distinguished panel. We thank you all for being here with us today. And we certainly thank all of you in the audience for being with us as we begin. You heard the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS mentioned. Very briefly, we want to talk about who we are. As you can see, we're a nonprofit organization, practitioner-led, and that's very important. Many of the members of this panel and many of you in the room are practitioners who have worked with us and spent some time in some of the leadership teams and practitioner network that we have around the country. As you can see, we've done regional leadership teams and have those established in 9 FEMA regions. 3,000 plus practitioner network spread across those regions over the last few years. We represent 800 plus state and local agencies, represent them in the way that they have come to many of our working group sessions and many of our training sessions, and we're happy to have those. And we coordinate with other national public safety and GIS organizations, so we're certainly pleased to be here. Why are we here today? You can see from the slides that are in front of you all types of different emergencies, domestic and international, man-made and natural disasters, all have begun to see social networking and social media become a large part of these incidents. certainly here in just the last 10 days or so in the part of the country that we're sitting in. As Leah referenced, we've started to see that. We're faced with all types of different incidents. Again, in this area of the country, it's almost brings a smile to your face. Unfortunately, a disaster. But when you look at the types of incidents that these folks up here have had to deal with, Chief Warner here in Virginia, whoever thought in the D.C. area in Virginia we'd be dealing in rapid succession with an earthquake and a hurricane. So many things are happening around the country and around the world. And then we need to worry about the day-to-day emergencies. As you see on the slide, the everyday structure fire, the everyday heart attack, the everyday law enforcement incident. Again, talking about each of these and how social media is beginning more and more each day to play a part in these responses and in the information flow around those. Fundamental consideration is that technologies used in a major incident must also be used in a day-to-day incident. It's very difficult to gear up for public safety agencies to be able to deal with social media if they're not doing it on a day-to-day basis. So we think it's very important that social media is something that these public safety agencies can ingrain into their day-to-day operations for those small events that I mentioned, so that when the larger events occur, it's not something they're trying to do on the fly. So we'll talk more about that as we move through the agenda today. Let's talk about a few examples of those types of things. The map you see in front of you, as noted, is Joplin, Missouri, and the recent outbreak of tornadoes. This is an example of a situational awareness map that was stood up to support those efforts. The map pulls in multiple layers of information, including topographic information, post-incident imagery, and a few other layers of data that can be used and are used in certain incidents. This also includes some multiple feeds from location referenced or geospatially enabled social media or other crowdsourced location referenced information. And you're starting to see more and more of that on maps that are developed both by official agencies and non-official agencies. If you can see, I know it may be difficult on the slides, a Flickr feed that photos that were taken by citizens have been uploaded by a mobile device in the area. You'll see 2 or 3 icons that represent that. You can also see dark red icons in several areas from Ushahidi feeds, another type of crowdsourced information that is a little unique, not totally unique, but a little unique, in that it is not completely unfiltered. There's a basic level of review or vetting that goes on before some of this information is posted. The message here is that this map, which incorporates multiple layers of geo-enabled crowdsourcing information, served as one tool that was used by both responders and certainly by the citizens in the Joplin, Missouri area. It served as one tool in the toolbox, providing heightened situational awareness for those responders and to some extent for the citizens in the jurisdiction. The next you see is a wildland fire map and a couple of examples that we want to show out. These are 2 different maps from 2 different wildland fires in Colorado earlier this year. They represent 2 different types of crisis maps, and I want to point out that that's going to be important as we discuss what we're looking at on these slides. What you see is a difference in the fire perimeters, which would be the darkest red areas on either map in the 2 maps. In map 1, the fire perimeter is not provided using authoritative data. It was drawn by citizens using social media based on information they were hearing, things they thought, what they thought they saw. Perhaps they were driving around and posting this information. They indicated what they thought the fire perimeter was and what they thought evacuation areas might be, which would be the larger red polygon on the left map, the map 1. It was initially created by a general citizen, which was interesting, but then published as a collaborative map where other citizens and volunteers could add to that map. They could post their own and publish their own information to that map, again, without verification. So individual citizens were taking what they thought they were seeing. Obviously, they were standing in a location. They were using their own eyes and their social media devices to post this up and then posting what they thought they were seeing. The interesting part of this map is it was then consumed by a news media agency and was again posted with the news media adding their own data and their own information to this map. So what we ended up with was a map that received 2.5 million views from the general public that had no verified information on it. And that is an issue we'll talk about more as we move through the rest of the afternoon. The relevance of map 1, as I noted, raises questions. Who would be liable from harm resulting from a general citizen using this map? For instance, they used what they thought was authoritative information on this map and went into an area that the map indicated was not an evacuation area or was a clear area and was not, and was subsequently injured. That's going to be an issue we talk about, and obviously we have a couple of attorneys on the panel today, and we hopefully we'll hear from them on that and hear some questions from you on those issues as we move forward. Now, on map 2, you'll note, is a salt fire was the name of the fire, and also in Colorado, as we noted, produced by the local emergency response agency and developed as a public information map, which included the actual fire perimeter and was published as such from an authoritative source using infrared interpretation of the perimeter. It also indicates, as you can see from some of the icons on the map, structures around the area of the perimeter which were at risk based on pre-incident planning. The local fire service agency and law enforcement agencies had done pre-planning on this area, which had a high probability of fire. So they had pre-planned that, and on this map were indicated the icons for those structures that they thought were in danger, which is good information, obviously, for the local citizens in that area. It also received substantial views given the population it served. So what we're seeing here is one map that the accuracy of it is in question, another map that was from an authoritative source. And that's what we want to talk about a little bit later as we move through here today. So the core questions, based on examples such as we just saw and others, are, what are the potential liabilities, as you see in the first bullet? These two map examples show multiple geo-enabled crowdsourced information feeds, and it poses the core questions you see on the screen. These are very complex questions, and that's one of the reasons for the start of this session today, to start to identify and ask those questions and then get experts to start to talk about that and get the dialogue started in both the emergency management community and certainly within the social media community. And what we want to do is try to address strategies and begin to address strategies to help address these questions in a way that can reduce risk and liability exposure, and also uphold our collective duty to prevent harm among all citizens and all persons. Very quickly, I'll read through the questions. What are the potential liabilities, as we noted, associated with producing or using any type of crowdsourced or volunteer information product in response to an emergency? And that liability includes a couple of things. Posting maps such as we noted earlier, which do not necessarily have authoritative information on them. The information could be accurate, but nobody has vetted that information. But as importantly, the liability of local resources and local response agencies using information that's being posted in that way. Certainly there are more eyes and ears out there to provide information, but can you verify that information to make response decisions on and movement of resource decisions on? The next bullet, of course, what can the emergency response community rely on? Crowdsourced information, volunteer geographic information, or crisis mapping products for? Again, that question of how do local response agencies, state response agencies, and even federal response agencies start to deal with this onslaught, if you will, this large amount of information that's coming into them now? How do they vet that, and how do they deal with that in this era of reduced budgets and reduced staffing, where you may not necessarily have someone to assign strictly to do that, and it may take someone to start to vet the feeds as they come in. And then the last is what strategies can be employed to reduce risks and liability exposure. The objective today, as Lee indicated, this panel discussion is the first in a series to get the dialogue started as we've started to lay it out here this afternoon. Today's panel and subsequent panels in September and in November will serve as a starting point for expert practitioners to inform the development of a coordinated strategy and provide practical guidance on how the emergency response community can engage with volunteer and technical communities and use its crowdsourced and volunteer information, especially that which is locationally relevant or geo-sourced. Now, key terminology. We want to provide a couple of definitions and terminology. The issues we're discussing here today are new. I know some of you will say, well, it's not that new, and certainly it's not, but the response communities are just starting to grapple with the issues we're talking about here today. So it's new in the respect that people are trying to put definitions to some of the issues that we're talking about. No one in this room is an expert on any one of all of these things. We've got emergency response experts, we've got crowdsourced experts, we've got social media experts in the room, but no one in the room is an expert on all of these things. So that's the reason for the dialogue. We want to ensure we're all operating with common understanding. We're providing basic definitions of key terms. And certainly this is not the final on all these terms and all these definitions. This is to start that dialogue. We want to make sure we do that. The definition provided here for the purposes of today's event only, and we recognize there may be variations of these definitions as we move forward over the next few months. And a copy of these terms and definitions are also in the packets that you all received when you arrived. Some additional key terminology, and we'll talk briefly about these because these become very important. And the first you see is volunteer and technology communities, VNTC, independent people that informally convene, virtually and in person, to contribute their skills and expertise with the intent to be of service in times of crisis. And certainly many in the room and many that are on the call with us today are parts of that community. The other is the Emergency Response Community, or the ERC, official government agencies and sanctioned volunteer organizations that provide public services in public safety, emergency management, and homeland security events. Now, the agenda for today. Obviously, we've been through the welcome and introductions. What we then will have is remarks from our panel of experts. Following that, there'll be a moderated discussion, a Q&A among those in the room, and we'll also be taking questions for those participating via the webcast. We want those that are participating via the webcast to please submit questions to us via email at commonslab@wilsoncenter.org. That's commonslab@wilsoncenter.org. A staff person will be taking those questions and providing them to me during the discussion period, and we'll read those that we can get to during the time period, and then we'll allow the panel to address those. Without further ado, let me introduce to you our first speaker, Chief Charles Werner. I mentioned that Chief Werner is Fire Chief of the Charlottesville Fire Department in Virginia. Charles Werner is a 37-year veteran of the Volunteer and Career Fire Service. He celebrated his 33rd year with the Charlottesville, Virginia Fire Department and presently serves as its fire chief. Chief Werner is a certified Chief Fire Officer Designate and National Fire Academy Executive Fire Officer Graduate. He has received 2 life-saving awards and numerous commendations during his fire service career. He currently serves on the Charlottesville, Albemarle County, or University of Virginia Emergency Communications 911 Center Management Board, and on the Board of Directors for the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation. He serves on several state and national public safety communications and leadership committees, including Vice Chair of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's SAFECOM Executive Committee, Chair of the DHS Virtual USA Executive Committee, International Association of Fire Chiefs Technology Council, Virginia Statewide Interoperability Executive Committee, and the FCC Emergency Response Interoperability Council. He is a recipient of numerous awards, including a 3-time recipient of the Virginia Governor's Award for Fire Service Excellence, the Virginia Fire Chiefs President's Award, the International Association of Fire Chiefs President's Award, and Fire Chief Magazine 2008 Career Fire Chief of the Year. He is also a nationally published author with over 70 published articles and served on the editorial advisory boards for Firehouse Magazine, Firehouse.com, and Urgent Communications. Chief Charles Werner.
Did I pay for that? After much consternation, I've been thinking about social media, and I know that some people are sitting here cringing that I'm going to say this, but I've come to the conclusion that social media is evil. It has no redeeming quality, and that public safety should be able to turn it off and turn it on as we see necessary. Let's let that resonate a little bit, let that soak. Quite the contrary. Since becoming fire chief in 2005, I have seen where there are situations that we are in situations where we're over capacity. I've seen four wet microbursts, which is one step below a tornado, with huge tree wire damage. You know what that intermingling means when you have a large tree canopy city. It means power outages, road blockages, a lot of discomfort for people that live in the community. I've been through 2 recent major snowstorms some have never experienced before of great magnitude with similar type situations. And then more recently, an earthquake. Sorry, I don't like that thing where the ground moves under your feet. But all these things have one thing in common, is we're at a point of what I would call convergence, where we have technology, we have applications, and we have connectivity, which creates a new anomaly, both good and bad. In one perspective, I see the opportunity that if we utilize the technology correctly, if we engage the members of our community more effectively, we can create what I believe could be called a resiliency corps, similar to a citizens corps, but that would take this technology and exchange information to the community as to what would be valuable for us as public safety to be able to see. So rather than me necessarily sending resources out to do windshield surveys, driving around neighborhoods and getting damage, if I could instantaneously get information from credible people knowing what they need to do with an application that would make this an easy operation, and then geocode it in such a way that I can see this stuff geospatially, it would create a whole new situational awareness much more quickly. And I'll give you one big example. In addition to the microbursts, which we have roads down and trees, roads closed and trees down and electrical wires entangled, imagine that you're responding as a first responder to Minneapolis to a bridge collapse. Now, I know when we get dispatched to calls, we are not anticipating that the entire bridge just fell. But as a conversation happened earlier this morning, in some ways, with the right engagement, I might get more information from a 13-year-old with a smartphone than some people that are trained to provide information. So now imagine if we have an engagement of our communities to provide information in such a way that we can not only receive information, increase our situational awareness, understand the impact, and be able to necessitate the response of equipment that we need to cover the call, turn it around in a situation where you need assistance as public safety from situations that have become a magnitude much grander than we have resources to cover. Major trees down, we might need transportation of critical medical people to a hospital during a snowstorm, etc. Reverse the crowdsourcing kind of idea to put out the call for help for people that you have already vetted in a way that creates this two-way, more synergy to recover. In other words, resiliency. I think that the other part of it is you need to be able to use these technologies in such a way that you understand it, and that you can also engage when there is misinformation. You have to be ready to realize that not everybody is here to do good. Some people intently want to do harm. But there's also a challenge because we continually see new social media solutions, applications. And one of the problems that we as public safety have is we don't necessarily have the staff to continually keep up with the constant migration of new things. We've seen the continual change of applications. So what I challenge the social media companies is to work with public safety to create a portal, to create an interface that allows us as public safety to have a credentialed entry into those portals that provides the ability for us to make an entry in one location that is then shared with multiple social media formats. So it would be an interface that becomes the standard for all future applications in such a way that allows us to be proactive and already be able to engage in those applications. Additionally, for social media to work more directly with public safety in a way that we can develop the applications that will create these applications that will continue to grow. This is not something necessarily that the government needs to get into as far as establishing. It's about the private sector. It's working with social media, coming up with solutions that are mutually beneficial in a business case world that will continue to sustain itself. I think the opportunities are great for us to work with social media, to engage our communities, and be able to deal with misinformation in an effective way possible. And thanks for the opportunity from the Wilson Center to have this discussion.
Thank you very much, Chief. As noted, we're going to hold questions until the end of until each panelist has an opportunity to state their remarks, and then we'll have an open discussion at the end with questions for each. Our next speaker is Captain Yo Gikas, as I'd mentioned earlier, from the Los Angeles City Fire Department. Captain Gikas is a 23-year veteran of the Los Angeles Fire Department. He was appointed to the rank of captain in June of 1998. He's also held the positions of firefighter, chief officer, staff assistant, and dispatcher. He is currently assigned to the Operations Control Division. Captain Gikas is currently assisting 4 technology interoperability programs having multi-agency and multi-jurisdictional impact. These projects include the Tactical Information Program, which is a GIS-based system to deliver critical response information to frontline emergency response personnel. A hazmat sensor integration and interoperability project, the Area Wireless and Reconnaissance Evaluation Project, which is a pre-deployed public events monitoring system, and the United States Department of Homeland Security Science and Technology Directorate's First Responder Resource Group supporting the Virtual USA initiative. He's served on that since its inception. He also serves on the National Alliance for Public Safety GIS Foundation's Southern California Regional Leadership Team. His professional experience includes commander of the Fire Department's Urban Search and Rescue Company, where he handled all aspects of technical rescue, including swift water, confined space operations, collapse structure, and firefighter rapid intervention. He previously held the position of commander of the Fire Command and Control Systems, Computer-Aided Dispatch, and 800 megahertz network unit. Throughout his career, Captain Gikas' responsibilities included performing analysis, design, and development on numerous projects involving mission-critical systems. Previous assignments also included the Advanced Technology Unit of the Los Angeles Fire Department's Tactical Planning Section and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security's Project Archangel in the Fire Service, representing developing of automated critical asset management system. He attended the University of California at Los Angeles and California State University at Northridge, earning a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration. He's a certified hazmat technician, as well as a communications specialist and technical search specialist for FEMA's California Task Force 1. Captain Gikas.
Oh, thank you, Rand. I appreciate you leaving all of that stuff about Man of the Year off. I didn't want to show up the chief. But very much thank you for the opportunity to be here. I have to echo the chief's thoughts tremendously. This is an incredibly exciting time. I can't imagine a more exciting time to really be alive, to be sitting in a room with a group of folks like yourselves talking about this subject. When we look around and Rand's display there and the chief's remarks, we are sitting on the cusp of really dramatic change, I think, with the technologies we have that support on a day-to-day mission. They're supporting the fire service, first responders, even our military. Some of these technologies, whether it be social media or GIS, they're direct support. Others of them are in the background a little bit. But when I say I'm excited to be here and excited to be alive on this stuff, I look at our soldiers that are across the ocean, and they're able to stay in touch with their family because of the technologies that we've developed here. That's astounding that we can see what happened in Japan almost real-time live, the disasters that were referenced. That's an incredibly exciting time, and as we start down this road, and I don't want to interfere with anybody that's actually already headed down this road. I know there's been discussions about social media, and I think some places where it's actually being used quite extensively. But I was asked to speak a little bit about, let's talk about where we are today, right now. I'm a platoon commander of a 911 center. I have 26 firefighters on duty every day, sworn firefighters that are dispatchers. We take roughly 2,000 calls a day for help that come in via 911, via radio, via other agencies. And we dispatch somewhere between 1,000 and 1,100 incidents every single day, and we take 500 or more people to the hospital every single day. So in our current workflow, and we talk about acquisition of information, that's where the decision's being made right now, to deliver a resource, to send a resource. What are we going to do with a call that comes in? As the chief mentioned, some are false alarms, some are malicious, but for the most part, most of them are legitimate calls for service. And an example of crowdsourcing that we currently deal with today, if you look at it this way, is we have an accident on the freeway. And in the state of California, when a 911 call comes in from a cell phone, and that's about half of our calls now are cell, on a freeway, the system's smart enough to recognize that the call is on the freeway, and it'll route that call to the highway patrol. And that call gets routed to us as the responding agency in there for medical service for a traffic accident. And we go through a structured triage, if you will, of that call. A small interrogation of the person that's calling. And maybe in this particular example, I actually have the person that was driving the car, and they're injured. And they were able to dial 911, and they got a hold of one of our dispatchers. So first thing I know is I have a first-party caller. That's about as truthful as I'm going to get in the business we have. Hopefully they know where they are, or that the 911 system, the wireless system, can help me figure out where they are. But I'll contrast that with maybe a neighboring car. We got a lot of traffic down there in Los Angeles, and maybe there's a bunch of cars sitting by, and someone else decided to call, and this is not far from the norm. We're going to get any traffic accident, we're going to get 1, 2, 3, 20 calls for the same accident. So now I have a second-party caller who's standing right near this injured person, and I can interrogate them, and I can ask them questions about where they are and what's the extent of the damage and what's the status of this injured person, because we also, besides from sending, we also want to render aid over the phone until we can get there. So I have a second-party caller, but I also have another call coming in, and this call is a little further back. The guy's angry, he's stuck in traffic, but he sees smoke up ahead. So he's telling me this, and where is he? Well, it's very common on a freeway. They know where the off-ramp is they just passed, because that was the sign they saw. So now I have a third-party caller. Can't really tell me very much, but he can tell me he sees smoke and he's stuck in traffic, and he's not even sure if there's an accident. And then there's the fourth-party caller, which is another agency, a trusted agency, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Highway Patrol, another fire entity nearby. So if you look at those third and fourth party callers as kind of crowdsourced, which is what they are, they're currently coming through a vetted channel. They're coming through 911 channels, so we process them. And we're going to act on them, and we're going to talk to the attorneys here. We're going to send some type of response versus what we're talking about today, and it's fascinating, is now we're going to start monitoring a map or a Twitter site or whatnot, and how are we going to process that? Where are they coming from? What can I gain from all that, and how do I send a limited amount of resources to that? So that today that's what we face every single day. Like I said, 2,000 times a day. I was also asked to give some examples of community resiliency, where these volunteer programs do successfully work, and we have many examples. I think the brightest shining example we have is called the Community Emergency Response Team, or CERT. I think that's a fairly successful program. Probably everybody in the room knows of that. That was started right in Los Angeles, if I could brag for us a little bit. What do we have there? We have a community of volunteers, and they've volunteered to give their time and help their community be resilient. In times of disaster, there aren't enough responders to go around. We've proven that over and over again. It's going to be the community that takes care of itself ultimately, and through some basic training and some organization, we're able to turn the population into a working force that can assist us or assist themselves, and maybe we can assist them. One of the big issues there with that team or the CERT program is we have personnel assigned to managing it day to day, fire captain or two or firefighters, and it's structured. We have basic training. People meet a standard. We have identification through helmets and vests and things. Contrast that with the social media or the tweets or whatnot, and we start to lose a little bit of the organization that goes with a paramilitary organization and operation like the fire department is. So I hope I've provided you a little bit of that real day-to-day. This is what we do today stuff. But at the same time, I can sit here and tell you there's no doubt in my mind with the entrepreneurial spirit of America and the brains that we have, that we're going to take these technologies and we're going to apply them to what I do every day, and that is going to ultimately provide a better service. And our service is really core. It is to protect life and mitigate any possible injuries or minimize injuries to any people. And I think with these kinds of technologies, and as the chief mentioned, the advanced warning and the advanced information that we can get helps support better decisions in a faster way, which typically in disasters and injury, time is the enemy. So I think we're headed in the right direction here, and I thank you again.
Thank you very much, Captain. Excellent examples that you put out, and hopefully we'll have the time to discuss some of those as we go forward with questions a little later. Our next panelist is Jody Kramer. Jody has been a general attorney at the Federal Emergency Management Agency since 2005. She is currently the legal advisor to FEMA's social media program, as well as FEMA's Web Governance Committee. She's also a program manager for FEMA's Office of the Chief Counsel's IT projects. Prior to joining FEMA, she worked as a contractor on policy issues for several government agencies. In addition, she's worked as a contractor working on content development and governance on websites such as www.dol.gov, workers.gov, and the GSA firstgov.gov subscription center, as well as several private sector websites. Jody, welcome.
Thanks. I have to tell you, back in 2007, our External Affairs Office came to our counsel's office and wanted to set up a YouTube site. And we kind of laughed at them and said, why do you want to put our videos out there on the public? And eventually, after 6 months of negotiating with YouTube, we were able to set up our first YouTube site. And then they started to want to use Twitter. And my boss at the time and I went back and forth and said, what is this tweeting thing? We couldn't decide if it was a twit or a tweet or what. And why would they want to be tweeting? And we started our Twitter site. We actually have, I think, 15 or 16 sites live now, Twitter feeds, one for each of our regions, plus our administrator tweets. I think he was tweeting hourly during the hurricane and the earthquake. And right when we started setting this stuff up, we had a discussion with one of the other social media companies, and they actually said to us, we're not sure if we want the government on our site because you guys will take over. That was their concern. And right in the middle of doing this, I actually went on vacation. Believe it or not, FEMA employees get to take vacation in November after hurricane season's over. And I was in Europe, and my public affairs officer was sitting in Washington. And in the middle of this, someone started a terrorist attack in Mumbai. And I'm watching it on CNN International, because I was getting ready to go out that night. And he's sitting there in the office, and I'm emailing him, and we're watching this thing unfold from the tweets. And CNN was basically reporting the tweets. And they didn't have anyone on the ground. They didn't have a clue of what was really going on. And the terrorists were actually sending out misinformation via Twitter. And CNN was reporting this as fact. So people started going into buildings that were being held by the terrorists. And that brought us all around in a circle of how do we trust what's put out there? And obviously, we know if information is coming to us from one of our state or local partners, it's verified. And there are other trusted sources. If CNN has a camera up there, well, maybe we can verify that. We're not too sure. During Katrina, they kept showing that picture of a body in the water, and it turned out it was a mannequin. So sometimes, even if it's on the news media, it's not always fact. So you have to be very careful on what is verified information and what is unverified information. But I can tell you, those of you who were here during the earthquake last week, I was one of the many people who eventually evacuated and was stuck in a, three-block radius with thousands of other government employees standing there watching, fire trucks go by. And everyone pulled out their smartphones, and they were trying to send out a call. And the circuits were completely busy. But the people who were tweeting about it in Washington tweeted to the people in New York who found out about the earthquake before it even hit New York. That is unbelievable, that the message of Twitter goes faster. And we went back to the office and we pulled out some of the media monitoring sites, and we were able to get all the tweets that were going on about the earthquake, about Irene, etc., in 2 seconds. And it's that type of information that if you can get multiple sources, then you can send out one of the first responders who can then verify it. But these one-on-one, we can color code maps to say it's verified, it's unverified, and that will help us reduce some of the liability. We started looking into this. And one of my first concerns, especially talking about geotagging, is I almost freaked out because I'm thinking the government is going to track where people are at a specific time and place. Well, great. We're the Department of Homeland Security. How's that going to look? Can you picture all the, we have these people who tend to go off on conspiracy theorists who think we're tracking them anyway. All these people think that we're going to sit there and create some database of where you were at this time and place that you took the photo. So I actually talked to one of the Fourth Amendment experts to make sure that we didn't have a violation by starting to collect this geotagging information, because we were a little concerned about being Homeland Security and possibly taking that information, even if it was sent to us, because now we have a privacy issue. We have a records issue of how long do we keep this information, and if someone puts in a Freedom of Information Act request, can they sit there and piece together where you are at a specific time? And that's a real privacy issue that we have to think about, even talking about public safety. We always think of public safety as during the incident itself. But if someone starts to know people's patterns of where they're sending in reports from or where they're located, that can lead to other cybercrime issues that we have to be aware of. One of the other things as a lawyer that, I think about is copyright issues. When someone puts a photo up on Flickr and then we take it and paste it into something else, are we infringing on their copyright, and are they going to later sue us for copyright infringement? And most of the program people are saying, well, they put it out there, so it's public. And unfortunately, under the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, the second you type something or take the picture, there's a copyright attached. So we actually have photo policies on all of our social media sites that tell people they're giving us a license to use it. So we've been able to use language for endorsements. We're very concerned about endorsements. The idea of showing which convenience stores are open so people could get supplies. We think that's a great thing. But then are we endorsing chain X or chain Y because they're open? So we've used little tricks like language and things like that to allow us to use these tools. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Judy. Excellent perspective. We look forward to, I'm sure you're going to get a few questions as we get to the question and answer session, so thank you very much. Our next speaker is Deborah Shadden. She's a core team member and infrastructure working group for Crisis Commons. Deborah Shadden is an IT enterprise architect at CNA Insurance and an active volunteer for Crisis Commons, where she serves as a member of the core team as acting infrastructure working group lead and Chicago Crisis Camp lead. Ms. Shadden has more than 20 years of IT experience with expertise in SOA integration, application and technology architecture, visualization and strategy, new technology introduction and risk management, performance and quality of service engineering, open source frameworks and practices, and agile development. She has served as lead architect on many projects ranging from 10,000 to 10 million. In 2010, she supported the response efforts of Crisis Commons for earthquakes in Haiti and Chile, floods in Tennessee and Pakistan, and a blizzard in the Midwest. She also organized Chicago's first Random Hacks of Kindness event in December 2010 and works to build local partnerships between the volunteer and technical community and traditional relief organizations, such as the Red Cross and CERT, which we've heard about. She holds a master's degree in software engineering from DePaul University. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you. I have a presentation. So thank you for inviting me to be on this panel today. I think I represent, I'm a typical volunteer member of the volunteer technology community. I work, I have a deep degree of understanding of IT issues, being an enterprise architect for 20 years, working for an insurance company. But I'm just one of many types of volunteers in my community. There are other IT professionals like me. There are people that are academics that like to research this area. There are folks that are students that want to participate. And, of course, we partner with, to the extent we can, members of the emergency response and humanitarian agencies. So I represent Crisis Commons, which, if you go next page, please. Crisis Commons, just to introduce folks, is a global network of volunteers who use creative problem solving and open technologies to help people and communities in times of crisis. We are a group that organizes crisis camp events. These events allow us to get together our communities, both virtually online as well as in certain cities. New York, for instance, is hosting a crisis camp event tomorrow night. And allow us to collaborate and brainstorm and crowdsource and innovate and do all those great things that we can in our way to serve our communities. And most of us are familiar, most folks are familiar with us through the efforts of supporting Haiti and Chile, where over 90 days, 8 different countries, 50 events, 2,000 volunteers across the world participated in crisis camp events and contributed their skills and time to helping those efforts. A lot of work was done in mapping, and mapping obviously is an important element of situational awareness and emergency response. And a lot of the crowdsourced efforts around mapping is one of the things we'll talk about today, so I have a few slides to talk about that. Crisis Commons is one volunteer technology community. We work with many other volunteer technology communities and recognize them. Here is some of those communities. All of these are open source, open data, friendly communities that pull together folks with subject matter and or volunteer technology expertise to work on their specific problems. Ushahidi was mentioned earlier today as a map. It's a mapping platform that is open source and was used most recently in Irene, but has many applications. Other open volunteer communities, just to introduce a few of them, are OpenStreetMap. Talked about that. That was a really critical effort in support of Haiti. Random Hacks of Kindness was mentioned. This is really a collaborative effort between several large companies like Google and Microsoft and the World Bank, Yahoo, to bring together folks for 24-hour, 48-hour hackathons where we get a problem statement and hacking for humanity. It's good, hacking. We work on problem statements in the humanitarian crisis response space and see what, and it's a competition of sorts, and through those competitions people can win and possibly parlay that into some sort of other future endeavor. Next slide. Crowdsource and mapping. So we talked, Ushahidi is one platform for crowdsourcing, and it's a fairly simple concept, and a lot of people can participate in this that are not technical. You would need access to the internet or other resources, but, you know, out there we're asking people, you know, what is needed, or people are reporting what is needed, and the source of some of these resources are not necessarily the mapping platform itself. Maybe the internet is being curated for information from Twitter feeds, for instance, which was mentioned earlier, or Facebook, or other mechanisms where people are reporting situations, information about the situation that they're in, needs that they have, things that they're seeing, creating this sort of citizen perspective of the situation. Those then can be reported into this platform, and there are some levels of verification that can happen where reports can can be validated and verified. And then that bubbles up into a social media sort of situation-oriented report. Next page. This is actually a screen print from this morning of this is IreneRecoveryMap.com, if you were to go there. This is citizens reporting information to sort of help other citizens. There really wasn't an expectation that this was going to directly be used by emergency response organizations. They have other mechanisms and mediums to do that, but it is one other perspective. This one was sort of thrown out there as citizens can report information and create this sort of map, and there are categories of that information such as damage, warnings, weather, that help to make this more user-friendly. So, and this map is built on the Ushahidi platform. Next page. So there are some challenges in this space, and particularly with the reliability of that data. And a lot of it has to do with who's submitting this data, what are the sources of this data. So verifiable sources, we talk about the need of people being able to post information from verifiable sources. YouTube and Twitter, for instance, can be verifiable accounts. So if those are sources of information, there's usually a level of trust above that. However, those are not necessarily the people on the ground. Those may be the people retweeting or reposting information. And so there's also this level of trusted sources. Certain communities, for instance, Standby Task Force, which is part of the larger crisis mapping initiative, looks to develop relationships. For instance, with the UN, they established a relationship with some of the Libya mapping, where they became sort of a trusted source of some of that information. And the reason they're trusted is because these folks have sort of adopted a common methodology, so they're predictable. They've looked to sort of garner some training, so they've got a base level of training. And therefore, those relationships are a lot easier to establish and trust can be created. And training, I mentioned. I'm also a member of the Chicago Emergency Response CERT team. So one of the things that we do in CERT as a non-technology volunteer is, we're officially affiliated with the city of Chicago. Now, when we respond or participate in drills or participate in events, we can, there's sort of a level of trust established. You can see the person shows up to your class. But when you're dealing in the internet, sometimes it's hard to establish direct trust because you can't necessarily see that person. So there needs to be sort of these levels of verifiability in place to both trust the sources of the data, who is submitting the data, and where that data is coming from. And one of the other concerns then is about quality of data, and these are really just sort of general IT concerns in general. A lot of systems deal with this, but timeliness of data, completeness of data, has data been validated? And whether this data has implicitly or explicitly sort of been created, and could it be wrong? So there's I'm geocoding my location, but maybe, I goofed and I'm really 3 blocks over. That's, I didn't really mean to do it, but the information's wrong nonetheless, versus the malicious attack of data, which happened with the Mumbai attacks. So certainly, whether that data could be wrong, both implicitly and explicitly. And accuracy of the data sources. Generally, verifiable accounts where that data comes from, news media sources that are trusted, tend to be, that are out there, tend to be better trusted sources of data. They've built up that trust over time. Next slide. And even non-crowdsourced data can be wrong. And I didn't realize this was going to be on TV. Here's all my personal information. But I did want to, I'm moving in 2 days. And my new address in my new town is wrong in my GPS in my car. So Google has it okay. OpenStreetMaps has it okay. It's 412 Southwest. That's south as in north-south, west. Not southwest as in one street, which the bottom is the GPS has it wrong in the car. So even verifiable, even data that you pay for and you buy can be wrong with regard to geolocated data. The promise of the crowdsourced data, OpenStreetMaps is the middle piece that I have here. That actually is correct in terms of my new address. If it was wrong, as a crowdsourced platform, I could go in and correct it. And there's a sustainable sort of community around the fact it's like the Wikipedia of maps, where if something's wrong and I see that that information's wrong, I can choose to go in and correct it as part of the larger crowd. I don't have to wait for a new a new release from the vehicle, the company where we bought our car, to be, which takes 8 hours to download just to get the map updated. So certainly, we tend to think that if we are going through trusted sources of that data data must, in fact, be perfect. But there are certainly situations where even that data can be wrong. Next slide. And so some approaches in the crowdsourced space of looking at verifiability and reliability include things like introducing multiple layers of validation. I'm not the only one who gets to say that 412 Southwest is the address. Someone else can validate that and verify this. These sorts of triangulation approaches work best to sort of create this perspective of data. Training and trust, Standby Task Force, Humanity Road, as volunteer technology communities have some robust training in place that kind of elevate them to a level of trust. Cross multiple source validation, not just SMS data, not just data that comes in from the internet, but maybe all their multiple sources of that data, including manual eye of sight. We put up a CrowdMap instance, which is one of the Ushahidi platforms for the Chicago blizzard, and in February. And we actually had some people reporting some incidences on that site, and we actually had some of our volunteers going and knocking on some doors for some elderly assistance. That's the best way to sort of validate if that information's right. And automation, certainly technology itself can aid in this, but it can help to aid in the algorithms that can exist to sort of validate that that data is correct. And then, sort of looking at the lessons learned and the after actions after sort of each event and sort of what worked and what didn't work, and using that and taking those lessons and adapting that back into a methodology that can be approved upon. So, and of course, the combination of all these things helps to make data more validated and more trusted. And risk and liability concerns, there certainly are some risks to the volunteers who are out there collecting all this data. We're not necessarily affiliated in the way that we're affiliated with CERT, and therefore we likely are not covered under the Good Samaritan Act, formally and officially. We have some attorneys here who can present some perspective on that. So that puts us as volunteers at risk, and we don't necessarily think about that when we're out there just trying to do good, but it does put some of our volunteers at risk. It would be great to be able to have some sort of mechanism where the virtual volunteers who are doing this sort of crowdsourcing of data that is used in direct response could in fact be protected. And the EM community, if that data is bad, then it could compromise both preparedness and response. And the public, is the public making decisions based on bad crowdsourced data? Don't go here because that road is blocked versus it might really be the next road over. So these are some of the concerns with the potential of bad data. So hopefully we can have more dialogue on these today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Excellent perspective, and we appreciate the address correction, so the housewarming party, we can all arrive at the correct address. Our next speaker is Governor Jim Geringer, former governor of Wyoming, and also now Director of Policy for ESRI. The governor received a BS in mechanical engineering from Kansas State University, then spent 10 years active and 12 years reserve service in the United States Air Force, working on unmanned space programs for both the Department of Defense and NASA. Projects included remote sensing satellites, the GPS system, Navstar, the Mars Viking lander, the National High Energy Astrophysics Observatory, and others. Upon leaving active duty, he served in the Wyoming legislature from 1983 to 1994, including 6 years each in the House and the Senate. The governor served 2 terms as Wyoming governor from 1995 to 2003, during which time he focused on improving education through standards, accountability, and technology, modernizing Wyoming's economic base to extensively include technology, changing how natural resource agencies among state, federal, and local governments work together, establishing community-based health and family service programs, and implementing strategic planning and information systems. While in office, he chaired the Western Governors Association, the Education Commission of the states, was lead governor on energy policy, and served on a variety of national and regional technology initiatives. He was a member of the Committee on America's Climate Choices under the National Academies, served on the Mapping Sciences Committee under the National Research Council, current member of the Community Resilience Committee under Oak Ridge National Laboratories, NASA PNT Advisory Committee for the Global Positioning Satellite System, the Board of Governors of the Park City Center for Public Policy, and current chair of the Board of Trustees of the Western Governors University. He joined Environmental Systems Research Institute in the summer of 2003 as Director of Policy and Public Sector Strategies to work with senior elected and corporate officials on how to use geospatial technology for place-based decisions in business and government. Governor, welcome very much to our panel.
Thank you, Ryan. I think I figured out the reason for these lengthy introductions is to establish our authenticity and authoritativeness. Must have something to do with the data that we're talking about today. Well, it is a tad embarrassing to those up here, but welcome nonetheless. I want to offer the observation as an opening that discussing social media for public safety and emergency response or crisis response, whether it be social media or volunteer geographic information or volunteerism in general, it's not new. Within the last half century, we've had things such as the Civil Air Patrol, who reported incidences of spotting what could be unknown aircraft that could have been invading our country. We've had social media going way back to when Alexander Graham Bell first invented that little device and evolved into a party line. If you want to know what social media exchange was, the first Facebook was the party line. Most of it was monitored rather than, well, let's not get into that too far. But when it comes to the types of things we're discussing today, I'd put the geographic information in one category and the social media information in another category at the risk of oversimplification in this way. GIS and GIS data or georeferenced data is that. It's data. Someone needs to do something with it. Some activity needs to be done on it. What social media introduces are 2 key things, emotions and passion. And that has changed the nature of how we respond today. The big difference between, say, 50 years ago and today is volume and velocity. How quickly it comes at you and in how large a quantity it may come at you. Those are the things that we're not quite prepared for today. And in addition to the emotions and passion, one of the risks of that using that type of information was observed by Mark Twain, so it goes back even further. Mark Twain said, "Rumor will be halfway around the world before truth gets his shoes tied." And we still deal with that today. I'm going to have you go through some of these slides fairly quickly, but let me just hit a couple of highlights early on. Somewhere in here, there we go. I don't know who to attribute this to. It was a slide sent to me, but I use it to illustrate how quickly something can happen. In the public safety and emergency response world, we say the first 72 hours are very critical. That's when everything is happening locally. Well, I want to introduce a new element to that. It's the first 24 hours that can become extraordinarily impacting, because the first responders to any incident are the victims, the ones who are involved in that incident. And they typically are the ones who are first to take any kind of action, so we'll call that the 0 hour. Within the first 6 hours, you have the micromedia, such as Twitter, coming on, and mainstream media. This particular illustration uses a newspaper. I assume it's the online newspaper because the print isn't going to be out in 6 hours. More likely it's going to be some type of video media, television or otherwise. And within 12 hours, the sharing will be going on very substantially through all the various social media that we're talking about. And within 24 hours, people are already blogging and editorializing about it. So those are the newer elements that have to do with volume and velocity, as well as the wide variety of things that are in there. If we can go on to the next one. We're typically in the remote sensing community and GIS community and aware of well-known sources of information for geographic reference. It might be satellite-based GPS and other imagery sensing satellites, from seaborne to airborne to fixed ground stations and the like. What we're not used to are the activities that can occur, such as, please go on, when everyone is a sensor. This is a representation using a little bit different model. This is the election, the referendum in Sudan held earlier this year, and how many people took an interest early on and where they were located based on the tweets that were exchanged during that time. I use it as an illustration that we talk about an event being localized because everything happens in a local area, but all of a sudden it's impacted by whoever has connectivity, in this case literally around the world. What has really dramatically affected both volume and velocity and the engagement of the public is the smartphone. So there are two things that are dominant here. One is access to the internet, and the other is the usability of a smartphone, which means it's enabled to use the internet and enabled to access any number of social media platforms that engage the public or become a sensor. Pretty much every one of them has a camera, and many of them have audio as well, so you can provide feeds from almost any citizen anywhere, either in response to, as a commentator on, or as a victim or a first responder. And many of the people who are officially trained as first responders and sworn within various elements of the public safety domain will use these same devices. So it's something that has changed the face of how we operate. It is a game changer. I'll put two of these slides up to illustrate the types of standard ways of thinking in the emergency response community, from mitigation to preparedness, response, and recovery, which are the four key elements of how we react in a public safety or crisis circumstance. As we consider what's going on with the use of now volunteered geographic information and the social media, the variety of platforms that were out there, our workflow is going to be altered in how it moves forward. I don't think the basic principles will change, such as the information that's sought ahead of time so you can mitigate the impact of any circumstance, the hurricane predictions that went on, the analytics that went into that, probably better modeling than ever before on a hurricane that has already been cited, or the preparation, having base maps, having an agreed upon method of displaying information by an official source. What becomes the great challenge is when there is no clear structure. The illustration that Rand used early on of one map that was generated by crowdsourcing, the other map that was generated by an official agency, you will always have both. You need to be prepared to deal with that. Crowdsourced, volunteer-generated information, all of those are useful, especially to fill in gaps, and particularly early on. But there has to be some way of designating which is a trusted source so that people will know what the limitations are on any of these activities. So the bottom shows what typically is the greatest challenge within any organization that's prying data out of silos. We're talking about today, we're getting too much information voluntarily. We don't know how to manage it, where in the past it's always been, well, we can't get the data out of those silos. They don't cooperate. They want to sell me their data. I think we're challenged on both fronts still today, but I put this up to say we'll have to change these workflows as well as these concepts to accommodate that. The next one illustrates the same type of thing, but it breaks it down into those areas. We're talking primarily data management as we talk about these sources of information, but that then leads to how do you handle that in analysis? How do you vet that? How do you verify? How do you impose some limitation on the reliability of the data? You may use it knowing some limitations are there, but that's what risk management is all about. And then the situational awareness, I believe that creates the opportunity for the greatest awareness that we've ever had the opportunity to experience. And of course, in the last one, field operations, now you can rely on information in near real time rather than waiting for time lapses and updating those things. Why don't you flip through these very quickly, and I'll comment on as we go through. So this is a common operating view by an official agency for the Deepwater Horizon, the Unified Command, all the types of things where people inputted information. It's the other purposes one that comes up at the very last that we're dealing with now. Integration of near real-time field reporting rather than once per day was the first time that was used in this circumstance. As we go on to the next one, and just keep paging as I comment quickly, field impact reporting. This is an official field impact report where volunteer-generated information would be different. Please keep going. The Joint Unified Command did as FEMA has done and operated their own YouTube site so they could convey information to the public. When you're filtering social media, there's a variety of ways that you can use analytics to do this through technology rather than having a personal review. You look for keywords, you look for time stamping, you look for geography. Both Flickr and Twitter have a geo-reference to them. Please keep going. On the Sudan statistics, there's something very revealing there. The location information for 95% of the tweets came from the user's Twitter profile, so there's a caveat there. That what's in their profile may not be exactly where they are. It could have been from a latitude, longitude in their profile. Only 0.5% were actually geotagged. So there's an illustration of the types of things you have to assess as you go into that. Only 11% were original information. The balance were either retweets or updated or referencing to other sites and searches. Please go on. Now, we'll go through these fairly quickly. It has to do with what we call a heat map in the GIS industry, and that's the aggregation of several social media messages all at once. So this one is all of them. Go down to the next one. It's the property damage, and I'll read from this one because I can see it better. Please go on. Hazards, next power evacuations, then power outages, and the next several, if you just keep going, are power outages over a sequence of days. So what it does is it illustrates how you can aggregate some of this information to give you heat maps, and it's an illustration of the type of thing you can do to focus the priorities and allocate resources. This is just another example. I think you've already seen enough of those, so we'll go on. This is from the earthquake. Disaster Response 2.0, again, illustrating the connecting with neighbors. Craig Fugate commented that he got better situational awareness before he got official word from the San Bruno explosion. I'm sure he was caveated appropriately by the legal department on how much you should say about that, sir. But he is an avid tweeter, I'll put it that way. He tweeted all during our user conference. Please go on. This is just the national level exercise on a new Madrid fault in the area in Middle America. We learned a lot there about the effectiveness of social media and how people followed along. Even when the field teams were dispatched, the search and rescue teams were dispatched, they were tweeted about so that the community knew who was there and when they were coming. We have provided public information map templates free of charge on our site. Go on to the next slide. There are several of those that are made available, including all kinds of base map information. And it's an illustration of how the private sector has volunteered for free any number of resources, templates, and information that can be used so that the public can become involved. The big difference is the volume of information, the velocity of information, how the public wants to be involved. So in terms of a policymaker, which I guess I've served in that role from time to time, in today's situation compared to, say, not too many years ago where a hierarchy controlled the information and dispensed it as needed and was able to control everything that went in or went out of a disaster situation, I'd offer these comments. There are no secrets anymore. Don't assume that you can hide information, and don't even try to hide information. Random acts of kindness will find you if no one else. I'm sure they will. Because any individual who's willing or able has the power to expose what were private in the past. And you can expect, as say, an on-scene commander or an incident commander, what you do and say will be blogged about in near real time. You have to be ready to reconcile contradictory practices or decisions that are going on. Every newscast is going to have an instant expert advising on the appropriateness of the decision maker who's in charge, whether it be Thad Allen or Major General Honore, the president, or any governor. So that it puts the burden on all of us to ensure that any efforts are sincere, defensible, and authentic. It changes our workflow. We've discovered with social media being what it is today that one-way messaging is not going to work anymore. You don't just provide information. The public wants to be engaged in a dialogue. They want to be actively involved. For all the talk about how technology is going to isolate us from each other, it's been anything but. So we should invite contributions from the public. We want to build goodwill and trust. If you don't build trust in a crisis situation, you will have anarchy. And that's the greatest risk that we have in the industry of providing support to public safety. So don't communicate strictly through press releases and scripted interactions. It just doesn't work anymore. A system for listening is critical to remaining responsive. I think I'll let it go at that and save my other comments for the question and answer session. Thank you.
Governor, thank you very much for bringing your experience in government education and the private sector as we grapple with this issue. Thanks very much. Our next panelist is Edward Robson, an attorney with Robson & Robson, LLC. Edward Robson, Esquire, is a practicing attorney with Robson & Robson, as noted, based out of Pennsylvania. Mr. Robson advises closely held businesses of all types, nonprofit organizations, municipalities, and local government agencies. He also represents local public safety agencies, including volunteer fire companies and ambulance organizations, advising them on a variety of matters, including internal governance, standard operating procedures, equipment purchases, and contract negotiations, including First Amendment issues and personnel policies. He has also authored several published articles on social media policy for local fire departments and the risk and liabilities for local public safety agencies relating to their employment policies and social media policies. Since 2003, Mr. Robson has served as a volunteer emergency medical technician with the Radnor Fire Company, located in Wayne, Pennsylvania. Prior to joining Robson & Robson as a practicing attorney, he interned with the Honorable J. Curtis Joyner, United States District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and was a law clerk for the Honorable Howland W. Abramson, Court of Common Pleas of Philadelphia, the Civil Division. Mr. Robson is a graduate of the Villanova University and received his J.D. cum laude from the Villanova University School of Law, where he was the editor of the Villanova Sports and Entertainment Law Journal. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. So I would suggest that the law has not had an opportunity to evaluate this. It has not weighed in quite yet. I think that liability surrounding technical volunteer communities is all over the place. I think it creates some interesting, what I will call exotic legal issues. First Amendment issues, choice of law issues, jurisdiction issues, privacy issues. But at the end of the day, I think the number one issue is not going to be exotic, but the mundane. I think it's going to be state tort law. It's going to be negligence claims from people who were injured from misinformation or by failure of the technical and volunteer community to respond, or the failure of the emergency response community to respond to a call on social media. So I think the question becomes, what duty does the technical and volunteer community owe to the general public when they're operating in their capacity as technical volunteers. Generally speaking, we all have a duty to act reasonably and not to put people in unreasonable harm. The question then becomes, what is reasonable for the technical and volunteer community? And that's a difficult question. I mean, I think, at this point, it would seem that we need some level of filtering to verify, at least in a simple sense, the veracity of information coming in before it goes back out. The other question, which I think is interesting, is to what extent can the technical volunteer community be held liable for their failure to act? Generally speaking, you have no duty to act. You have no duty to rescue. The Restatement of Torts puts it colorfully. If you're sitting on a dock, smoking a cigar, watching somebody drown in a lake, you can continue to sit there and finish your cigar without liability. The law generally doesn't impose an affirmative duty to rescue or to act. Courts are somewhat uncomfortable with this notion for a variety of reasons and have carved out a variety of exceptions. One exception is you may have a duty to respond if you have created the danger. So, one situation I could envision is a piece of information coming in regarding a bomb in a public place. Without verifying it, a technical volunteer community retweets it, sends it out, and causes a panic. They then learn that that's not accurate, but do nothing to resolve the situation. I think there's liability there. Another situation where a duty to act may arise is if there's a special relationship between the technical volunteer community and the general public. And courts recently have looked, when looking for special relationships, they will look to the public's dependence on a organization or on an individual. So as the public becomes more dependent on these groups, we need to consider what effect that may have in creating a liability for failing to act. So I guess the long and the short of it is I would suggest that technical volunteer communities should sit and finish their cigar. I think there's a role to absorb the data, organize it, and make it available. But to the extent you undertake rescue in the sense of directing responders actively or suggesting that people go one way or another, I think there's the potential for some additional liability there. Second thing I'd like to touch on is the emergency responder community. Now, unlike volunteers, these organizations do have a duty to act imposed by statute, common law. Typically, it hasn't been an issue as to when that duty arises. Somebody calls 911. Now, with the advent of social media and crowdsourcing and other things like that, the question arises, well, what happens when somebody texts 911? Or what happens if somebody puts a Twitter feed or a Facebook post onto a municipality's fire department's website? In the past, I think you could make a reasonable argument that it's not reasonable for that citizen to expect somebody to respond. I'm not sure that's true anymore. So I would suggest that emergency service organizations be very clear about when they believe that duty arises. They can do that with disclaimers on their website, but the conservative approach, I think, would be to alert citizens at every point of access to a department. So, for example, if somebody texts 911, they should receive a text message back that says, "We will not respond. Hang up and call 911." That should help define the emergency response community's duty and help to limit some of that liability. So that felt like about 10 minutes to me, so I'm going to yield my time back to the chair.
Thank you very much. Great perspective, both from the legal side and, of course, your experience in emergency response. So thank you very much. Our next panelist is Martin Valentine. Marty Valentine is a senior underwriting portfolio manager for USAA Property and Casualty Insurance Group. USAA provides insurance, banking, investment, and retirement products and services to 8.4 million members of the U.S. military and their families. Mr. Valentine leads efforts that help USAA members learn how to build disaster-resistant homes that make for more durable communities. He is an expert in loss mitigation and catastrophic risk management with more than 21 years of experience. Mr. Valentine works closely with the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, which most of us know as FLASH, and the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety to promote strong, well-enforced building codes and loss prevention programs that protect homes and families. He is the co-chair of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety Residential Alliance Committee and serves on the Fortified for Safer Living Task Force. Mr. Valentine earned his MBA from St. Leo University and holds a BA in Finance from the University of South Florida. He's a chartered property casualty underwriter and holds an Associate's in Management designation. Marty?
Thank you. Appreciate that. We have some first responders here that have talked to us a little bit, but as an insurance professional, I want to share my perspective on us being the second responders. And I think Hurricane Irene was an example of that. And as the first responders are staging their activities, the insurance companies are right behind them trying to stay out of the way of the responders, but using a lot of the same information. So the power of the technology and the spatial analysis and aggregating data and validating information, which you've heard from my fellow panel members, is extremely important when I give my perspective from a risk management perspective, from an insurance professional's perspective. So I just want to share with you some thoughts on risk management and how GIS technology can apply to making decisions more precise, if you will. The work that I've had the opportunity to do with IBHS, FLASH, it goes back to resilient communities, which we've heard about. How do we make communities safer, stronger? We have better response time. We also want to have buildings that are more resilient to storms. The science is not behind building a storm or a structure that's indestructible, but you can greatly increase the chances of returning to something instead of coming back to just flat land. So that's something that's very important to the community and also from an insurance perspective. Precision, transparency, again, the spatial analysis, when you're looking at multiple data layers, you can get it from the public sector, and also you have the opportunity to apply your business rules to determine more precision around how you manage your risks. And just to level set on risk management, I take the perspective of you're identifying a risk, you're assessing a risk, and you're prioritizing a risk. So as an example, if you take a look or think about the United States and you think about some of the natural disasters that we've had this year, we had record-setting tornadoes run across the country. We've had snowstorms in the recent past. Obviously, we have our wildfires that we have to respond to, and the hurricane season is just starting to kick up, as we've seen. So it's important from a risk management perspective when you think about if you have to make decisions and more than 50% of the U.S. population lives near a coastline, how do you manage your portfolio and how do you spread that risk, if you will? Well, GIS helps do that. Again, ways to do that. Take a look at, we saw some slides of neighborhoods or maps, if you will, and even to bring it closer in this room here. So a traditional underwriter risk manager would group this entire room as a risk, a homogeneous group, and it would be a yes or no, same price, everybody the same price. With more precision analysis, information, and technology, I can charge an individual price for everybody in this room. I can also make a decision, an individual decision for everybody in this room. It might be yes, it might be maybe, and it might be no. The maybe might be, I can insure you at this price if you're willing to take some mitigation action, if you will. So that's turning the tables, and it's making things more flexible. It's providing more alternative solutions to customers. And again, I think most of us consider ourselves to be special, so I don't necessarily want to pay the same price as someone else. And I feel like I take care of my home better than others, and maybe I'm a safer driver. Maybe I'm not, but that's the way I feel. So price me accordingly. So we often talk about visuals are very compelling. So having the rooftop level view of something allows folks like me and others that are in the risk management business to really see how close that house might be to the coastal storm and what the particular heat maps may show in terms of risk. When you look at data layers, you consider storm surge and wind bands and things like that. When I can see how close it is rather than looking at an old atlas map, maybe that we used to do back in the day, it really helps say yes, no to things that are really, really close together. Again, that's me speaking as an insurance professional. But we'd like to think that visuals are much more compelling, and I tend to agree with that. And it also helps us understand risks. How do you incorporate GIS into your infrastructure of your business? Some of the key components to think about is, can you make it scalable across the enterprise, your own particular enterprise? You need to meet the needs of your key stakeholders. You want to make sure it's an enduring model. You want to make sure it's multidimensional and very flexible. You want to simplify the complex. A lot of information comes in, and we've heard that. And how do you filter that out so you can make a decision in a very timely manner? And that's easier said than done. And then here's something to think about. Transparency, we've heard. So what if you get to the point you're fully transparent and you self-underwrite? Now, that's really validating information. You probably need to get to the trust and verify stage on that, and a lifelong underwriter has trouble trusting without verifying. But there's an opportunity for insurance to take the next step in that fashion. So I'll leave my remarks at that. I appreciate the time.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that perspective. And thanks to all of our panelists for some great opening remarks. I think many of you probably have questions. Hopefully that just in the opening remarks, some of those questions have been answered, or at least pointed you in a direction perhaps to do further research. But let's take questions. We'll start with questions from the room, and then let me reiterate again for those of you that are joining us by web, submit your questions by email to commonslab@wilsoncenter.org. So, in the room. Yes, sir.
David Blankenship, Colorado Springs Fire. I'm David Blankenship. I work for City of Colorado Springs Fire Department. And I was curious, Ms. Shadden, on your remarks talking about how the voluntary geographic information is collected and your community providing that. I was interested in two things: in your insight into how first responders should utilize the information that you provide. Are you providing that with any intention for that community to use that? And then Mr. Robson, if you wouldn't mind commenting on, sort of elaborating on what you talked about. If that's being provided and I'm a fire department using that, how do I limit my exposure liability? Sort of the question about the mechanics of using what's available and using that wisely and effectively in my community, but not burying ourselves in lawsuits.
Okay, thank you. I'll start. I do believe that the idea of collecting this data through these virtual volunteers is to create those situational sort of awareness reports. It is one perspective. It's not the only one, and I think we heard some of that. It can be another tool. I do believe that we do have an interest in trying to establish those relationships more formally so that some of the data that we collect, which we think could be useful, could be used. One of the ideas we would like to explore, for instance, is when the public is out there collecting the data from your perspective, and it can be different whether you're fire or police or OEM. What are the ways that data should be curated and categorized? We tend to take guesses at what we think the categorizations need to be, shelters, damage, but maybe there's another way to tag that information that would be more useful and have a more direct impact directly to the community. And I think that's still an area we're looking to evolve and explore.
So the short answer is I'm not really sure, and the reason I say that is because I'm not aware of any case that's ever been litigated. I'm not aware of any law directly on point. So in some sense, it's a little bit of a guess. The analysis here, though, I think, is whether you have been reasonable. I don't think it is particularly different from any other claim against a fire department. So I guess the first thing I would suggest is be reasonable. So have some procedure for vetting out some information. Have it written. Don't make it up as you go. Make sure people are following it. I would suggest, documenting your use, documenting where it's coming from, and go from there. I mean, it's a risk, and it's very hard to evaluate at this point. But certainly a policy that's been reviewed, that has some input from, obviously an attorney, but also from your chief officers, from your administration. I mean, you guys will be the experts in the field. So, and I think that's worth something in court to say, well, we analyzed this. This is what we believe. This is the information we gathered, and make a record of that and document in the policy and make sure people are following it. So that'd be my suggestion.
Go ahead.
The follow-up on that is, it made me curious talking about that. If they're curating information and creating trusted sources and that's evolving, this thing evolves very quickly, but as that's getting better and better, say a public safety agency handling Irene or Katrina or something much more small scale like a wildfire or a San Bruno gas leak, if information is curated and available to the public in a resolution and fashion and speed that has good fitness, do I incur liability, or is there a problem if I ignore that? If it's available and I respond as usual, but that's a better source of information than perhaps I had. And maybe that's unanswerable, but that's a question. That's a can of worms. Maybe.
It's a great question. It's a can of worms. I guess, again, I would have a policy on it. I mean, if particularly for, I have the information and then don't respond, got to have a policy there and got to alert the public as to what that policy is. I mean, when you talk about a duty to respond, courts look at dependency and what people's expectations are. If nobody expects you to respond to a text message or a Twitter feed or whatever, I think that helps. I think that helps reduce liability. But I wouldn't want to venture a specific guess on that. But it's a risk. I don't know how to answer it better than that.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you, Rob. Yes, sir, in the back.
I'm Clarence Wardell. I work with CNA, which is not the insurance company, but Center for Naval Analysis here just outside of D.C. I work on the safety and security team. I've also had an opportunity to lead some research efforts with Crisis Commons. I had a question, kind of follow up on what we were talking about, Mr. Robson. You started talking about this issue of liability for the volunteer technology communities, and the example that you gave was a retweet of misleading or misinformation, false information, and that perhaps opening up that community or particular organization to some liability. But I guess I would push you a little bit further, and I'm just really curious, and I'm glad we broke this out into kind of the different liabilities for the for the various communities, because I do think they're unique questions among all those. But I'm curious as to why did you take that step to liability for the community as opposed to the individual who initially placed that information out there? Kind of recently, I was just watching the Twitter feed through Hurricane Irene and the recent earthquake. I saw specific individuals, especially individuals who maybe had 100,000, 1 million followers. Several occurrences of individuals retweeting misinformation, then later going back apologizing, or after it was, led that it was misinformation. So I'm just curious as to why did you stop at that community aspect and not place any of that liability on the individual?
There may be liability for the individual. I stopped there from a purely pragmatic reason that most plaintiffs' attorneys have no interest in suing an individual. So to the extent there is an organization that is financially viable and has some type of insurance, they are a much more important target than a single individual. And it's an interesting question because in the speaker materials there was a question as to whether it would make sense to limit liability with some sort of corporate structuring. And that's a difficult question. I mean, you want to form your 501c3 so you get tax deductions, and at the same time you may be putting a target on your back, as opposed to sort of an informal group of folks who get together. If something goes wrong, they just disappear and vanish, and there's no one to sue. So, I guess there's some different ideas there, but the reason I jumped to the community aspect was purely practical. I don't see too many claims going out against individuals.
Excellent question. Thank you. Would any other panelists offer a yes, Governor?
Well, just to offer a little bit different perspective, I understand the nature of legal advice and why you need it. I sought it often. But I put myself in the place of a first responder, the two sworn gentlemen that are here. They have a call to respond. It's in the interest of the human response we have in all of us. So every time I had advice from my attorney general or other people who were saying, you better be careful on this, you shouldn't do that, or this is the way we could say no, I'd say my obligation is to find a way to say yes. So I'd couch it in the same terms. You need the wisdom of a chief, of a captain, who can say, in the context of this situation, this smells, or this one is a legitimate response. So the wisdom of years, the experience of professionalism makes a big difference on top of the legal part of it. You have to make a choice. How much is in the public interest and how much is in the private interest? So I would only add to the need for the legal opinion by saying you also need to balance that with find a way to say yes.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, question on this side.
John Nystrom. I guess my first question is for you, Chief Warner. What reliability issues associated with crowdsourced and volunteered information impacts your ability to use it in daily operations? Meaning, having known users in your community that are interacting with you daily, not just during an event. And the second one for you, Ms. Kramer, is sort of the liability issues that we talked about, and the recommendations to leadership and others not to use these things and support tools, and sort of turn it off until it's figured out, and sort of how can we get past those issues?
Well, to start, I think the value of us having people that we have credible contributors. Let's just use Community Emergency Response Team as an example of maybe one of the first level of resiliency core people we might create. One, the interaction that takes place on a regular basis creates the relationship of credibility, makes the information that comes to me as a public safety responder much more effective. Whereas if you just get a plethora of tweets, as you notice when you look at Hurricane Irene, when I was looking through social media, you see everything from things that are pre-Irene pictures to post-Irene pictures to pictures that have nothing to do with Irene, or maybe another Irene. So I think that relationship really changes the credibility and the value of that inner workings on a daily basis.
And You know, we've never said don't use anything. Well, the approach we've always taken is I make sure that I know how to use the technology. So I work with our programs to play with the tools before we fully turn everything on. And one thing that most people don't realize is a lot of lawyers are technologically illiterate. So a lot of it takes having the program person who understands the technology, getting them an account, sitting them down, and making them use it so they can understand how it works, so you can spot the issues and then come up with the solutions. And some of the times you can't turn every tool on, but the approach we've always taken is we turn on immediately what we can turn on, then keep evaluating and keep looking at how we can make it work. So, for example, at first we didn't take photos on our Facebook page. But as we realized, okay, we'll moderate, we'll put the photo license up there, so then we can then add that in as it goes along. So we start basic and then keep reviewing and analyzing to get to the next step. And that may take a few more days, a few more weeks to get there. So it's an evolving process as the technology advances.
Excellent, thank you.
I wanted to
Please.
add, you know, we talked a lot about the organization and the responsibility in trying to separate the two. I would say that the crowd is out there, the crowd is creating this data. People are looking at this data. These emergency response organizations, FEMA, they're looking at the data. What we're trying to do is fill a gap and to close the technology gap, not to necessarily be this island off doing this work independently. Just like CERT volunteers can help staff augment the emergency responders for crowd control, we can help, many of the volunteer technology communities believe we can help to close the technology gap. And that means from an information perspective, a technology competency perspective, to help train and educate folks in these communities about how technology can help. And that's, you know, more the informal sort of relationship as opposed to, you know, formally we create a map and you use it. So I think there's a couple different perspectives to consider.
Excellent, thank you. And Ed, I was going to give you at least a minute to defend those technologically illiterate attorneys, but we'll move on.
I have 6 followers on Twitter.
Can I just add one thing? I think the credibility of who you're tweeting with and who you're receiving tweets from is very helpful in the sense that since I've been sitting here, I've been reading the tweets from different places. There's an issue. First of all, let me do a disclaimer. I have no validation of any of the information I'm about to provide to you in this conversation. But there's an issue with a suspicious package in Miami airport. I've seen David Blankenship has been giving regular updates out to what's been taking place in this meeting here to people that are following him. I've seen where my local TV station has put out for a call for volunteers to help fulfill a drill that's happening September 19th. And I've seen the updated Twitter that's come out from FEMA about Tropical Storm Katia, and I've looked actually at the map to see what the map is taking, and it looks like it's jogging a little bit north, and I've got my fingers crossed. So I just wanted to say the validity and the credibility of the people that you have makes a difference in the information that you're receiving.
Excellent, thank you. Additional questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Jen Bacon-Salati from the National Academy of Science. I had a question for Ms. Kramer, and I'm hoping Warner may want to chime in as well. Chief Warner mentioned a portal from the different applications and technical services. And it's my understanding that the federal government has some different user agreements with Twitter and Facebook. And I guess I was curious as how you may see those user agreements and changing in those user agreements helping resolve some of these questions.
I actually negotiated the first one. So the user agreement differences between the general terms of service and the government versions are basically changing about 3 clauses. The one clause that the government can't sign is the indemnification clause, because that's an open-ended liability and it violates appropriations law. So we just changed that to represent the Federal Tort Claims Act, which covers that. Then most of them those agreements say that any disagreements will be held in the state of California, And obviously, due to sovereign immunity, the federal government can't be sued in state court. So we asked them to go to federal court. And then one of the other issues that comes up all the time is a confidentiality clause. And under the Freedom of Information Act, we have to release information. So we put a clause in there that says that we will release it pursuant to FOIA. So those are really the three issues that come up all the time, other than the one that we will change this at any time, which obviously there's no point in renegotiating if we're going to change it in 2 minutes. So those are really the things that are what we do as the government attorneys to make those changes. And we've been very successful in negotiating those with the social media companies. It takes a while to explain the indemnification clause issue, but once I get on the phone with the attorney for about 15 minutes, we're usually good. So the hard part is some of these companies only have 5 people, and their attorney is $500 an hour, and they don't want to talk to the government and pay $500 an hour to make a change. That's the biggest problem we have.
Thank you, Jody. Any other panelists want to comment on that question? Seeing none, we'll move on to additional questions in the audience. Yes, on this side.
Good afternoon. I'm Carla Boyce, and I am a practitioner turned strategist turned policy. So it was good that there were some recommendations from the panel to develop policy and procedures ahead of time to help maybe reduce the amount of liability that we might undertake. So my question is kind of twofold. Does anyone on the panel have some suggestions as to an approach on how to develop some of these policies, maybe some best practices in policy development? And do you see any differences in those strategies and policies from the federal government to the state to the local government?
Jody first, and then the chief.
FEMA actually developed a Web 2.0 policy. We got signed in December. I think we're one of the first government agencies to actually have a Web 2.0 policy. It's more on the creation of Web 2.0 tools and the use of Web 2.0 tools, plus some of the employee usage in their personal capacities, which is a concern for us. So we've actually been working on SOPs for every tool we use, and working with the program, our legal, and policy to work together to put together these policies to make sure that everyone follows the rules, and they're basically procedure-based. That you have to, our big thing is that we start working as one team. So when we work on a tool, that our public affairs office, if it's external facing, is involved, our chief information officer is involved, our cybersecurity office is involved because we're afraid of attacks, our privacy office, our records office, and our legal office. And that we all, I call it, we identify all the issues, tell you what's wrong with it, and then tell you how to fix it. So that's kind of our procedural policy at looking at how we use each tool and then coming up with specific solutions for the tool itself.
And I guess what I'd like to add is when you're looking at the policies that you're going to put in social media, one of the things that's probably not a good idea to do is to try to define each and every social media application that's out there. It's more to be specifically general in a way that you cover policy as to how it's created, the sharing of information, the use of photographs, et cetera. I will say that the Department of Homeland Security has also developed a Communities of Practice website for public safety to go into and actually see a number of examples of social media from other places. I'm also on the social media working group, which also provides information as far as general guidelines about social media and how public safety can take advantage of using social media.
Thank you. Great question. Any other panelists have observations? Yes, Governor.
I'd say one of the key things is to decide what information you could derive from social media or, on the other hand, volunteer geographic information. In the GIS community, we have standards. We have the Open Geospatial Consortium. So that's the type of thing that makes GIS data definable, usable, or at least its capacity to be put in that category. The thing that's introduced now, I mentioned earlier, passion and emotions. How do you quantify or standardize that? there needs to be a policy on how does that influence the decision makers. Well, it's going to influence people who have a public responsibility, a governor, a fire chief, somebody like that. So the policy would be, how do you deal with this type of information? What use can you make of it? Should you make of it? You do need the advice of legal people, but standards, wherever you can apply them, would be important. Training, preparation in advance, and for anybody in the volunteer community, education and training in addition to what they already have, so that they understand that there are some policies and practices that can enable the filling of those gaps in a standardized way.
Thank you. Let me note it is 4 o'clock. I know the agenda says we were wrapping up at 4 o'clock, but if we have additional questions, we'll go beyond that because we don't want to slow this great dialogue down. So we'll go on for some period of time if we have additional questions.
If not a question, but a statement. I'd like to add that one of the things we've seen with social media is that the inappropriate use of social media to give out information from incident scenes that are very sensitive. So there's a moral issue, there's a credibility issue, there's a sensitivity issue. And the point here is the warning is that if you don't initiate the policies and educate the people, as the governor has mentioned, you very quickly can go from heroes to zeros.
Thank you. Additional questions? Yes.
Hi, I have a question. Let's see here. I'm not quite sure how that thing is working. I guess this goes back to a couple of questions and points that were raised during the panel, and as Ms. Shadden recommended almost, is that a structure be developed for the volunteer and technology communities, like the citizen emergency response teams and the CERTs. And this is kind of a two-part question, both to the response agencies and I think also to the both folks from the legal perspective is obviously the CERT, the Citizen Emergency Response Team, is a formal sanctioned part of FEMA. And so what would be involved to either absorb the VNTC into that, to formalize their role, or setting up a separate structure either that can support public safety agencies at the local level or support through the federal system?
I'm not our expert on our Citizen Corps program, which CERT falls under, but Citizen Corps, from my knowledge, is, someone correct me if I'm wrong, the national focus of the organization is headquartered at FEMA, but each of the councils is a nonprofit that's centered within the communities. So while information and training go up and down, and FEMA provides the training structure, that the Citizen Corps themselves, the local affiliates, are actually not a part of FEMA. Now, saying that, I don't believe we would need statutory authority to make a technical part of Citizen Corps, and that's probably a programmatic issue to address that from happening, and it may or may not be in the works. I haven't talked to them about that. I know that our Citizen Corps people are very engaged in Web 2.0 activities, and we've been looking at how to engage that community in additional communities, and looking at how to create communities for the preparedness community, both from the individual and the organizational perspective. One of the things we just launched is a National Preparedness Month community, which is a pilot of organizations that are involved in National Preparedness Month, which is next month, activities. So that could lead to more communities of trusted sources to go into situational awareness.
So I could just add, so from my perspective, and this is just one perspective, and I hope to have my facts correct, but through the CERT communities within the state of Illinois, and I believe it's regulated at a state level, which is one of our domestic concerns, because there's the national law and then the state laws. But at the state level, CERT volunteers within the state of Illinois are protected under the volunteer laws of the state of Illinois if they stay within their confined training. If they tend to go outside of their training, then they do put themselves at additional liability and risk, and not only themselves, but their organization. So I think what one of the proposals was to consider, is there some level setting of training that sort of educates the volunteers that can provide them with the tools and the knowledge and the skills to act as a trusted sort of source, gaining some of those responsibilities and then being protected under sort of the volunteer acts if we remain within our training. On the flip side of that, I really love your find a way to say yes. That's going to be my new tagline on Twitter today. So find a way to say yes. Sometimes if we try to put ourselves in these boxes, I think that one of the perspectives we'd like to think is that there's an opportunity for innovation and for things that we haven't thought about doing, but with that comes risk, personal risks, organizational risk. I think after Haiti, the community of the 2,000 people, everyone just sort of had a collective sigh of relief that nobody was getting sued. Nobody was, had put anybody in harm's way that we know of, that our actions actually furthered the effort. But through that, there were also some sort of envelope-pushing moments of new technology ideas that people didn't even think about that were brought forth and sort of, so not only was there no training, it was a moment of innovation. And so I think that we look to both work and respond within this defined training and box, and I think there's a certain responsibility and accountability that should come with that. I also think, though, to the extent that we can try to find ways to innovate and push those envelopes and boundaries as well.
Excellent, thank you. Yo, I think you have a comment?
Yeah, if I could add, I don't think there needs to be necessarily a formal structure. Where do you put this group? We have volunteers of all types. We have individual families that volunteer to come in and cook food when workers are out working. We have the Red Cross, and we have the community emergency response team. So where to put them operationally or organizationally, I don't think is such a challenge. In fact, what I think I need to hear is we need an attorney full-time. But as far as operationally, by the time if we get past what I'm going to call my day-to-day life and get into something that sounds like it's a little more expanded, these disasters or long-term things, we have convergent volunteers, spontaneous volunteers. We have all kinds. What's needed is a way to manage them. And that, I think, is incumbent upon us in the organization that's going to use them, the fire department in my case, to have a method of, I don't want to say funneling, but necessarily funneling this capability and this capacity, because it's huge. I echo the governor. The stuff is flowing way too fast. It's not processable. I don't even want to open our door to say we can handle anything, because it would overwhelm us. How do we curate that data? How do we process it? It's not manageable at this point. So I think the place to start is much like we did with the CERT program. We've got to get some kind of structure to this, in essence, limitless stuff that we're talking about, and boundless. As I mentioned earlier, I'm fascinated by it. It puts some new challenges. I echo the governor once more. He talked about workflows. The workflows here is what we're talking about changing for the fire service. How do we respond when we have somebody send us some type of a request for help? I'm looking at it a little more day to day than I am in this populated heat map thing. And how would I respond to all of these messages if we opened up and put our shingle out and said, okay, we can accept all this now? We don't have enough people to process the number of messages the chief himself said he's been reading. There's just no way to do it that I can think of at the moment. I think the innovation part we're talking about here is some of these smart folks out there in the computer world that can develop these algorithms to automatically process these things. I came across one the other day where we've taken satellite imagery and we can, using algorithms, we can search for things that don't belong in the ocean, sinking ships or whatnot, just through computer analysis, and that's been translated over to searching the wildland for a different color, light spectral kind of footprint, if you will, that says, hey, something's burning out here where it should be just green trees. I think something like that is what's needed for somebody in my world to be able to process the amount of information we're talking about, and we're going to need somebody to coordinate that, much like we have volunteer coordinators now.
Thanks, Joe. The chief has a comment, then we'll go to Ed.
I think one of the things that I'm seeing and hearing is that the technology, the applications, the conversions, all this is making things happen. It's coming. It will find a way. So the point I want to make is, as we're looking at these things, we have to get social media involved now in the process of Next Gen 911, because that's where we're headed. Is what's next, how's it coming, how fast is it coming, what's the volume, what information's valid, how do we maximize it, how do we get the information to first responders automatically as this feed comes through. This is all what's happening in our world of technology, and we either need to be proactive about it or we're going to be reacting to the information that comes that we're unprepared for, and I think that's critical.
I don't think the analysis is, find a way to say yes. The answer is yes. I mean, the train has left the station. Saying no is irrelevant. I think the question is how do we manage that? What's the structure? And, to a certain extent, all you can do is reduce the risk, and then, I'm going to get shot on the way out. But that's what insurance is for, right? So, I mean, you can't live in analysis paralysis. You'll never get anything done. I mean, you're going to go out and respond. It's going to happen. So, of course. All you can do is reduce and insure.
Thank you, Ed. I really don't want to wrap this up, but I think I've pushed this about as far beyond our agenda as they're going to allow us, but this is great dialogue. So I'll give the opportunity. Does anybody have one last final burning comment or question? Yes, sir.
Terribly burning, but I did want to just put it out there for situational awareness. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that there was a pilot program within FEMA called NetGuard, which that I think recently concluded. I don't know what the results or outcomes of that was, but it started looking at how do we kind of translate that structure from the CERT teams and start leveraging a sustained IT technical volunteer community, and just kind of for situational awareness.
Yes, Governor.
One final word, and that is we're looking for ways to distill things down to where, in the final analysis, judgment can be applied. There is no automatic system using technology that will give you the answer. Technology can enable choices. Judgment has to be applied. That's why you have an incident commander or someone in charge. So that's what we're trying to focus it toward.
I think those are great closing words. Leah?
Thank you, Rand. That was a terrific start to our monthly series. And speaking of the series, I want to mention that we have 3 more sessions in the works, including one on private sector innovation for emergency communications. We've also got one of the chief scientists for Did You Feel It on citizen-based science for earthquakes. And follow-up to this session on reliability and liability of crowdsourced information, but in an international disaster management context. So with that, I'd like to again thank Rand, the panel, and also Rebecca Harnett for all hard work helping us to put this together. She did an amazing job. So thank you. The session is now